Hello, so my name is Dr. Patrick Jones, and I'm on the Online Prosperity Show this week. And we're going to be looking at the balance between external quality of life and internal well-being and how to get there.
Welcome to the Online Prosperity Show, where we uncover the secrets and success and also the well being in the modern world. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and today's episode promises to be a roller coaster of insights from the one and only Dr. Patrick. Dr. Patrick, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm ready to roll.
Absolutely. Now, for those that are meeting Dr. Patrick for the very first time, he's a master of mindfulness and the architect of balanced living. With his wisdom and wit, we're going to embark on what I think is going to be one of the best journeys yet. Now, to just kick it off, Patrick, tell us what it is that you do and how you got involved, with your passion for mindfulness and well-being.
Yeah, well, probably thanks. Like a lot of people, I was a student myself in this journey, and my big question that I had was how can someone that's possibly like a multimillionaire on a yacht in the Caribbean have to have that question like, have I taken my Prozac this morning? Have I taken my anti-anxiety pills? And yet, on the other side of the world, say there's might be like a Tibetan monk in the snow in complete bliss. And for me, I was like, how's that possible? Because one's definitely quality of life, but there's something going on with the inner well-being thing. And the other one is like clearly inner well-being, but geez, it's cold. So like that's not a great life condition. I don't want that. And I was like, which one's right? Quality of life or inner well-being? Because clearly we want sort of both. And that's got me on a bit of a journey, I guess. And I ended up pursuing, for better or worse, a doctorate in trying to find out those answers. And I both went academically looking at that, but also I just went to endless, meditation talks and challenged the teachers on, why is the smell of a rose actually suffering? Like I'm not sure about that. There's some of the more subtle things I went to, and I was always the one putting up my hand going, don't agree. How does that make sense? And the teacher compassionately goes, well, the rose is beautiful and it smells great, but if you're somewhere attached to that rose and you don't want it to end, in some way there's some suffering in there. Yeah, okay, I can get that. And I was enjoying my convertibles at the time, and I was like, yep, enjoying the quality of life. But, I was beginning to get convinced that that inner well-being thing, especially when I was meeting, people of different traditions, whether, Eastern and Western traditions, that didn't need any of my stuff and yet were teaching me. And so I started to get a bit more humble over time and started to not just challenge, but also just ask the questions and kept trying to bring it back into my research. And I guess over time I built this, which I think is a very common sense approach, this model of external quality of life and internal well-being, and the balance to get that, and how to do that. And one of the things I found essentially was that one of the big areas, which now has become mindfulness, back in those days it was just meditative stuff, or how to manage the mind, was the big kind of internal one. And the external one that made the difference from the research as well was goal setting. It's like, actually how to have it, they say, people who, what does it, fail to plan, plan to fail. Or in the Old Testament, I think it's, people without a vision are lost. Or it's just that sense of, if you need to be able to, or that, the what is it, chance favors the prepared mind. When you've actually seen it and the mind has seen where it wants to go, it recognizes, is that going to take me further or closer towards that thing I'm after? Because I've actually noted it down. So I looked at all of that work and tried to separate the difference between, say, like a dream, wish versus actually, strategic strategy. And part of the reasons that shift that is that I actually write it down. I set it, I set a strategy, I set a time frame, and then I evaluate it, pre and post. Like that's all the stuff that turns that good stuff into pragmatic and practical stuff. And so I was doing all of that whilst trying to continue my meditative journey and trying to get better at stilling the mind. And then something over time I learnt more and more with teachers, and then something kind of cracked in the mental meditative space where I kind of what I call broke the back of the mind and actually experienced the gap between thought or silence. And that was a staggering insight for me, that literally the mind can stop. There is a gap between the end of your last thought and the beginning of your next thought, and it can go on for more than a millisecond. So that was a big shift for me when I realized I could actually stop this mind like the body, it could be still. And so then I started practicing building that space between thoughts. So eventually I could just sit silently without having to think, which then did a lot from the business point of view, because it meant that now this tool was a little sharper in terms of where it could go. And then over time, I built a program which we call, the long version was the Mindfulness-Based Quality of Life and Wellbeing program. We ran that through the doctoral research and through government grants for the community. And then its final version is, the Clear Mind, Open Heart program, which is now going to be coming out in a few months as a book, which is the self-help version. So that's kind of some of my journey, both practically, business-wise. I created a few companies over time and some real estate portfolios that came and went in the GFC. But some of the businesses stayed, and we built more things. So there's a kind of a fairly successful psychology company that's now running with good chunk of staff doing good things for the world. And mindfulness, I guess, is sort of the predominant backbone of my own personal work, and with a group of people. So been an interesting ride, as you say.
Fantastic, and thank you for taking us on that journey in and of itself. Now, this whole thing you say started off with a question where you were wondering why the Reach seemed to be very anxious about their outer appearance, whereas people who had inner their inner well-being was intact, seemed to be able to sit on the ice and be unscathed. Now, questions like that don't just come about. There would have been some sort of exposure to either one or two of these worlds. Which one would you say you stemmed from?
Yeah. I kind of had a bit of a, and perhaps some people relate to this, a bit of a switch between one and the other at different times. So in my original journey, when I was quite young, I actually went off to the seminary to study to be a monk or a priest. So I was there for a few years, but I'd already done a psychology degree before then, and I left that to go back to psychology, and I kind of moved more into business, public relations, and I just wanted to kind of get that quality of life, perhaps because I'd missed it a little bit with that sort of more ascetic approach. And so, I had this bit of a swing, but I think over time I realized that that alone was, now there was just that kind of disgruntlement somewhere in there. It's not quite it. And so I thought, well, let's try and aim for how do I get that double major, you could say, in the external quality of life and the internal well-being. I think it's, as I said earlier, I think it's quite intuitive, that we want to have a life that works, but we also want to be happy when it's not working. I think to me, that's the right balance.
Absolutely. And most of your discovery, obviously, because your inner world determines what your external world would be, because you cannot be that which you cannot feel or be, do, and have, or something of that along those lines. Now, do you think environment played a major factor in that? Because I don't think Elon Musk is sitting there thinking, how can I be a monk?
Yeah, there are positives and negatives to having, say, your external life conditions working really well. And that is, you don't necessarily look any further until they don't go well. And I think the people I've worked with over time, I had a great dude that I could hear him vrooming down my driveway in his brand new Porsche. And, he's well known, he was in the papers, and, he had a few issues, and he'd come and would sort them out, and the thing would get fixed, and then he'd zoom off again. I wouldn't see him till the next kind of issue. And so an example there is where his life was working, super abundantly, you could say. But there wasn't really a need to look anywhere else until it broke. And I think that's the somewhat, it's what I call event-based well-being versus inner well-being. And if the events are going well, you do experience a sense of well-being. We would say positive affect is high and the positive emotion, negative affect or emotion is low. But the driver behind that is very biological, very kind of basic, which is essentially we're just driven to optimize pleasure or good and minimize pain or bad. So basically, in its biological pursuit of pleasure, the avoidance of pain, which is a very kind of gross level of living, because it just means that it's what I call the external quality of life or approach as well, which is where our focus is just, and Buddhism talks about this as well, is that the cause of suffering is too much of that desire, I must have this thing, or too much aversion, I must not have this bad thing happen. And the third part they say is ignorance that my happiness only comes from those two. It comes from that. And that I have to get that right. And if I don't get that, well, I'm always struggling to balance them, because quality, again, if you reference Buddhism, is that quality of all phenomena is that's impermanent, which means it's always changing. Those things, I always have to adjust them. They're working well, but then I need to tweak it. They're not going so well, I need to adjust that. It's always in response to those things having to go well, and then I feel fine. Which means there's an underlying nervousness in that model that it has to keep working for me to feel okay. And I think the shift is when an inner well-being model comes in. It's like I can access that inner space where I feel good. And then from that place, I still make those adjustments, but there isn't that nervousness about it, because I still feel good, but I want to run a functional life. And that's why I'm doing it, because it's a cool thing to do.
Absolutely. And obviously that in and of itself presents that calm and, better lifestyle for the person who then finds that sort of balance. But the average Joe, average Sally is trying to just get by. Go to work, there's a lot of noise there. On their phone, there's a lot of noise there. And they wouldn't be able to sort of even to hear their own thoughts, to even know when they start and when they stop, or which ones are theirs and which ones aren't. Now, what would you suggest is maybe the first place that people would need to maybe get started, to go on this journey, because it's just too much noise out there?
Yeah, no, it's good. And it's interesting because I used to live a bit more of a hermit lifestyle, a bit more, in the bush and away from things. And it was much easier for me just to see how obvious and easy it is to just be at rest and peaceful and relaxed. More recent years, I've gone back into the more mainstream world. And one thing I'm surprised about is just often how non-thinking a lot of people are, simply because they're just in their life and responding to whatever's going on the whole time. And that's a bit of a tyranny, really, because it's not out there. First, it is in there. So I think the first step, based on what you said, and it comes from mindfulness, good description, is to do what they call to step back. And instead of having, say with your thoughts, instead of, say, a thought going in your head like, geez, I'm just no good at this stuff, is the thought, and I am that. The mindfulness approach would suggest you step back and go, use these key words, which is, I'm having the thought that, ... I'm no good at this stuff. And as soon as you've had that step back, you've actually just stepped back and observed the mind, as opposed to, I simply am what I think. That cogito ergo sum with Descartes, I think, therefore am. It's almost a little bit like that. I mean, he's using that for existence, but this is like, whatever I think, I am. And no, they're just your thoughts. And mindfulness has also a really nice phrase, which they call it passing. They call thoughts passing mental events. They don't call them realities, because they are things that do arise in us. But we can do one. It's the one step back approach. I'm having the thought that ... I think that's usually the first step, so that you have a chance to see the movement of the mind. And then if you look at CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the steps they use in that is they hear someone say something like that, I'm always bad at this stuff. We'd call that a cognitive distortion, more specifically catastrophization or, minimization or something. And what they would use in response is what they call cognitive disputation or restructuring, where they just go, let's challenge that thought. Is that a reality? Like, what's the evidence for that? Same approach in a way, which is to have a more objective relationship to my thoughts so that I can observe them as mental movements. And then in that space, have a choice. Is that thought, which could be, like it might be better to go to Coles at 5 versus 7 because it's busy. Like, our mind is meant to be used as a discriminating tool. So that's a neutral thought. If we can step back and have that ability to step back, we can then choose to go, that's a neutral and useful thought. That's not such a good and useful thought. Perhaps I can just let that one pass because they all come and go. So answering the question, this ability to step back, I'm having the thought that gives me a choice of a more objective relationship with what's going on in here.
I quite like that because so many of us are just taught to be the individual, and there's no teaching either in school or even in the public space of you are not your thoughts, as what you are actually saying. This now, so many people would have grown up in that sort of environment and then just go to work. Do you think if such programs that you maybe have in wellness are introduced to work spaces, people might become a little bit more productive, or they might actually become much more functional because they have to assume a different role when they're at work than when they're at home?
Yeah, I agree. I think it depends if these programs are coming out, but like for example, Google, the most popular training program in Google is a mindfulness program, and they've cleverly called it "Search Inside Yourself," which is not bad for a Google browser. Um, and the keyword search is silence, ideally, but not really. But that's good. And so it's beginning to happen, and also in the EAPs, the employee assistance programs in companies. They're beginning to have relationships with psychology companies like the one I have, where they have counseling contracts or training with their employees, and the company pays for that, like 3 or 6 sessions, and the company will cover the initials, and then they can continue more if they need it. And then consulting and training programs on mindfulness, stress management. They're good. It's interesting how one almost like, what's the word I'm trying to avoid, selling these programs to companies, proposing their benefits, better way of putting it, is that they reduce staff turnover, they reduce workers' comp, they increase productivity. So even like from a bottom line point of view, these companies are choosing these because they actually are better for their bottom line. So, I think in an ideal world, everyone is after win-win. Like a company would like to have its bottom line, if not increased, at least not sabotaged by that, the mental health issues of an employee if they're struggling. And the employee obviously would like to, have some help. So I think ideally win-win is good. If it's going to benefit the companies and benefit the employees, these programs should evolve and increase. The only danger can be is when they're not entirely used for that. They're just used to increase the KPIs. It's just like by someone getting better at present moment awareness, they're going to be more on task and have better output for our sales targets or something. Like there's a slight, mismanagement of mindfulness in that area, but humans are humans.
Absolutely. I mean, Patrick, you can always understand if you can use something to your advantage, you might as well utilize it. And if it enhances your KPIs or productivity of the people that you're, supervising or looking after, then, it just works out like that. But, the reason.
Just I'll throw in this one bit. One of the reasons I also works from the task management being on task is what, for example, they talk about performance anxiety, like Wimbledon or any of the sports, the high level sports where the pressure is right at the end. They have this lovely thing called a refractory period, which is where you've got cognition or thought and emotion coming in. They're both needing to be processed, and they go through like a bottleneck, and they take priority in terms of processing. And out of the two, any thoughts about which one might go first, emotions or thought, if they had to be processed? What do you think?
Well, half of the time, whatever would make you complete the task. I think is the thing that really needs for you to be.
You would think so, but it's not. It's emotion, because emotion is linked to survival a lot more than just executive functioning and thinking. It's a like newer part of the brain. So it's very maladaptive or dysfunctional, but it's the case. The emotion gets processed first, which is why performance anxiety, great, musician, but they're anxious. They just don't play as well because they're struggling more to manage their emotional set, and their skill set doesn't have a chance to fire as cleanly. So the advantage in terms of it's just an aside, but in terms of performance is if you look after the emotional dimension of employee or yourself, it means there's less static in this system and a much cleaner processing style, and therefore everything's easier. It's faster, it's more efficient, it's more elegant, a nicer life.
So could that then be what the team at Oxford University discovered? Because, the reason why we are having this chat today is they say there is virtually no evidence that mindfulness and well-being sort of apps improve employee well-being. Is it that aspect that, they don't know, the thing that need to be processed first, which is either your emotions or your cognitive ability?
Well, I guess this is where when you do a bit of research, you kind of have an approach to what you hear in research. And I both write articles and also peer review research on mindfulness, regularly. And it depends what type of the quality of the mindfulness that they're also assessing, and the quality of the training. So, for example, there are some studies where a mindfulness intervention, they look at someone that's done nothing, so that might be the control, and then they compare with someone that's done like one session of mindfulness for per week, or let's just say that, and it's say for 15 minutes. I mean, it's something, and then they test the pre-post over time, compare the control versus the intervention group, and they find not enough difference. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why that's the case. I would expect that Oxford, that again, not everything good comes out of good facilities, but essentially, you'd want to have what they call a decent sample size. So, the smaller the sample, the smaller the power, and the harder it is to get significance. The bigger the sample, so sample size can sometimes affect the results. But the other thing that can also affect it, and that's purely just from a stats point of view, but the other can be the length of practice. So, I always say, if you do, say, mindfulness training or meditation for, let's just say good, but, half an hour every day, but then 12 hours a day, you've got the most frenetic job, or just a normal job, which is like continually demanding you to think and problem solve and worry and that. And after a week or a month, there might be some concern, well, this mindfulness training is doing no good. It's possibly because you've given your mind half an hour to go in one direction, and the other 10 hours to go in the completely opposite direction. And it just isn't enough to make the difference. So that's one of the concerns that they have with the efficacy, you could say, of mindfulness training, is that it does work, but you also have to do it for a significant period of time, both in terms of what they call frequency and duration. So it has to be enough times per week to start to override this tendency going completely the opposite direction. So increase in frequency and then increase in duration, which is the length of time that is the practice is done. So that's one of the concerns. There are a few others. Sometimes if people get too into it and don't have a balance, as my old director said when I was at uni, the concern is to become so heavenly minded but no earthly good. Sometimes people can get this kind of like more of a whispery voice. It's all good, and they develop an aloof. Some of what they call how mindfulness and meditation is contraindicated for well-being. is when people can detach from their life and they're not so pragmatic and practical. So there are kind of what I would call traps for young players. Having the frequency right, having the duration right, making sure your level of engagement in the world remains stable. So with these things in place, the vast majority of the research suggests that it has consistently significant impact. But then there's other areas that we don't need to worry about. Just usually self-report, people saying, "Oh, this is the change." One thing, but now neuroscience is kicking in and going, "Well, great there are self-reports telling us this. What's the actual brain telling us?" Because that's starting to move from the soft sciences, you could say, in psychology, to the hard sciences, the empirical stuff, or the physiological correlates, you could say. And there is massive increasing evidence that the brain changes. They've had literally evidence that the brain increases in grey matter in the areas responsible for attention with long-term single-pointed concentration practices. Why? Because how does a neural network work? It literally gets stimulated and it grows. So it's kind of not rocket science in that sense. I remember there's a study they did of some guy, poor job was to tap his finger on a desk for like, I don't know how they did it, occupational health and safety these days, at like 8 hours a day or whatever he did. And then they just mapped over time the neural networks in the part of the brain responsible for tapping. And those neural networks just like exploded, because it's stimulus, and again, that's unfortunately what happens with traumatic environments as well, is that the brain gets stimulated in areas like the reptilian brain of fight and flight. And so, for example, they did work on, the Vietnam vets when they came back, and they hooked them up, and they found that surprisingly, well, there were two findings. One was that the reptilian part of the fight flight and the amygdala, they all were just lighting up because they were still in hypervigilant mode. They hadn't learned to turn it off because of being what? It was frequent. The frequency and duration for the times that they were in there was so significant and chronic that when they came back, the neural networks were just like in place, and they just found it so hard to adapt. So there's so much evidence. Just on that point, the contrary finding that they weren't expecting was that the parts of the brain responsible for quality of life, and the more frontal lobes and so on, they weren't firing as much. And they thought, we didn't expect this, but what these people were doing, they were selecting out quality of life moments because they weren't relevant for survival. Like, you're in the jungle, you hear a twig, you're hypervigilant because you need to know if that's something. But if you hear a bird whistling, it's like, you don't care. Oh, yeah, go, oh, God, so nice. Is that like a parakeet? Not relevant, selected out. So they come back here and they're selecting out art galleries and really nice music and, geez, that's really good food. Who cares, So it's interesting, they're imprinting the mind. But going back to the mind is an interesting point, right? How the mechanics works. But they have found with mindfulness that the brain changes. The final one, that's spieling too much about neuroscience, but the DMN, or the default mode network, connected to rumination. So when people are worrying, they just ruminate or loop and loop and loop. And they've found that it's much more engorged or lit up. They've consistently found, this is why some of these other studies are a little bit BS, is they consistently found that when the mindfulness practices are done properly, that DMN, that the rumination significantly changes. In other words, the unnecessary looping and thinking just becomes less, which leaves you a much cleaner system to be able to process life, problem solve, and have a good one.
I know, absolutely. And thank you so much for clarifying that, because so many people were just starting to think, is this going to work, or is this going to affect, the people that are in the corporate space? Are they going to have that much support in order for them to have, well-being, resilience, or maybe stress management programs, ushered to them? But the lifestyle that we live in this day to day, the social media, the streets that we live in, does that leave room for any mindfulness? Because everything is busy.
Yeah, totally. Just to tag, if anyone wants to get some of that research I've been referencing, I mean, there's a
Yes.
couple of articles, and one I've written is called Mindfulness and Non-Dual Wellbeing. And what is the evidence that we can stay happy? That's just one that people want to actually get a bit of the other. research. That's kind of pretty good. And the other one is my mindfulness, another article basically called Mindfulness-Based Quality of Life and Wellbeing Program. So just in terms of referencing articles. But specifically back, I think my website has, the drpatrickjones.com has, I think the references for those different things too. Yes. But specifically in terms of being in the street, I think it's the amount of stimulus that's continually being given to us and taking us away from that centeredness. So is there something specific that you're looking for in terms of what people can do, or can you just give me more clarity on that?
Absolutely. If you can maybe help us with certain tools or tricks or things that people can actually do to bring themselves to center, because there's just so much stimulation around us that it gets a little bit overwhelming, so much that I don't think people would find time or space to be mindful in their day-to-day lives. So would there be anything that you can suggest?
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, again, if we just stay with a mindfulness theme, and, there are many different words and descriptions of this. So it's just the one I use, and different traditions have ways to describe it. But again, if we just stay both practical and research-based, there are some major areas that if you can get right, make a real difference in terms of mastery in this, the inner well-being one. For example, just in a nod, for example, with the external quality of life ones, the top 5 you kind of have to have right, and goals would be, pretty much in order: relationships, work, money, health, leisure. They're the kind of the 5 spokes in the sense of that wheel that, for it to be rolling properly, that you need to kind of have optimal. And people report, say, 8 out of 10 in 4 of those, but 2 out of 10 in 1, they don't report good quality of life, because like they might be, great in all those areas, but their leisure is 2 out of 10 because they're just so busy they have no time. So they don't present as happy people. Or they've got everything else right, but their 2 out of 10 is money, and they're like really struggling because they just don't have enough for X, Y, Z. So those that, both, just as internal well-being has its own things that you've got to have right, we're more familiar with the external quality of life area, and those 5, we recognize, we have to have those right in our life. When one of them is dipping significantly, we feel the impact. So that's just a nod to the external quality of life and having good goals and strategies and time frames. It's making sure they're continuing to grow and having a vision and a sense of what I want my life to look in those areas, and actively, consistently working on it. But now the internal. So I like to separate it into kind of, head and heart, if you like, because we don't want to just be like, we all polarize somewhere. Some people are just like really precise and like analytical and accounting like, and other people are just like warm and lovely and connecting. And you kind of want to have that balance, right? I love seeing some of those absolutely lovely, frenetic chaos, open-hearted women, say, that I have seen occasionally, like at the shops or whatever, massive trolley load. And I'm not trying to polarize here, it could be a male, it doesn't really matter, but are the ones I can remember, and they're so lovely and open-hearted. But man, I want to live that life. It's just crazy, just everywhere, So got open-hearted, right? But have they got, like clear, organized, analytical, getting that side? So we want combo, just as the balance in the external quality of life. You want the combo of a clear mind and an open heart. They're the 2 combos. So under the clear mind stuff, it might be a bit much for people to remember all of these, but at least I'll note what they are. The present moment awareness is the one of the big ones. It's like, can I just be in this moment? Doesn't mean the next moment I won't get back to 0 reconciliation to counting or something. But in this moment, there's a breeze coming through my window, sitting in the chair. This moment can be all right. I don't know what I'm going to do about those 0 reconciliations at the moment, or in the future, but right now, this is okay. So that's the first thing to kind of get right. And people can do that. You talk about busy in the street and whatever else. I used to say you can practice this one between your office and the coffee machine. Just can I just be in the moment, 25-second walk between A and B, and just be with the walk. It's not because it's hugely significant. Is it going to change mankind? No, at this moment, but it's just turning me up in the life that's actually going on. That's a really foundational one in mindfulness, present moment awareness. Second one, which is almost as critical, is what we call neutrality or non-judgmental awareness, which I've highlighted a bit earlier. The ability to step back at will and observe those three cogs in the human machine that are going on at any given time: thoughts, feelings, sensations. It's not that hard. It's not a complex machine. It's just like this step back and just go. And you can even ask that very neutrally, non-judgmentally, which is what I do with some of my students as a check-in. So what are you thinking in this moment? What are you feeling? And what are you sensing? What's in the body? There's no should or must at this point. It's just observing neutrally, non-judgmentally. So that's the second bit. From that, we can do a lot. But the ability to do that step back, or I am having the thought that, or I'm having the feeling, or I'm having the sensation of. That's the second. Even those two are pretty significant, and that would, if someone can just be in the moment and then also just be able to step back, there's a big change already. We haven't done much else.
Could you also add maybe the traffic light? When you're just sitting by the traffic light, just waiting for it to turn green and not be anxious about anything or try to figure out, just be in the moment of that red light.
Perfect. I'm glad you said red light versus quiet, eyes closed silence, because now we're moving into that aloof, detached mistake. But yes, with the red light, exactly. Yeah. And these life offers these little moments, waiting moments. It's not doesn't have to be the pull out iPhone moment. It can be like 15, and I'm not talking about traffic lights, but like waiting in the queue or something. It can just be, I'm just here. It's almost like, God's gift to give you a moment just for you. You don't have to be productive and hit a KPI for the world right now. This is your time.
Absolutely.
Nice.
So all these tools are in the Clear Mind, Open Heart book, which I think is a must read for anyone that's seeking balance and fulfillment, right?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's certainly the result of a few decades of work, both with people and research and so on. I mean, it's been run in programs, but now it's the sort of the self-help version, which I think is going to give it a bigger reach. They're just some of them. It's up to you. I can knock off just a couple more examples that would be useful. The third would be what we call clarity, which is the ability to actually know what I'm feeling. So sometimes people, I used to have a neighbor used to get angry, and you could hear him over the fence. And I'm not angry. It's like, well, I think you are, buddy, because we can hear you. So it's clarity is this ability to not be a mystery to yourself. Actually, just now, and if what's happening here, and with adolescents in therapy, they're not sure, because my first client ever in training was a 16-year-old that literally just grunted or yes or no for an hour. That was horrific to get anything out other than just, like, there wasn't much insight or ability to then. So when that happens, there's a way out of that. You just give them an A4 sheet of paper with 50 different facial expressions, so that people can then at least point. So what am I feeling? I think it's very important to have awareness of what actually is happening here, because then with awareness, as they say, what you can't, is a counting term as well. What you can't measure, you can't change. Yeah. So, is that insight. Once you've got a little bit of this stability, I then encourage people to develop what I call the regulation of attention, which is the ability to direct your attention wherever it needs to go, which is kind of the opposite of an ADD tendency. And that does require some exercises. So I'm not spruiking the book, but in that book or in anything, there are exercises to train the mind to what we call single point of concentration, like the rise and fall of the breath, just counting the breath from 1 to 5, in breath, out breath. Just that exercise from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 is training the mind. Very simple exercise, again, from here to coffee machines are also an option, to train the mind to be where you want it to be. And if thoughts or things come off to come out, to distract you, you just bring that attention back to the rise and fall of the breath, or whatever it might be. I remember that I was teaching a postie, this postman, like many years ago, and his big thing was like, I just want to focus on the candle. And he was a rough kind of dude, but somehow he just latched onto this single point of concentration of this candle thing. He's going, I just sit and watch that fucking candle, and I tell you, buddy, you're intense, and it's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't matter who where you are. It's like that ability just to ever just be humble enough to train, and be a student. So that's that. And then the final one in the clear mind would be the thought suspension, which I've referenced earlier, which the ability to be able to suspend, because these are all foundational. Once you get better and better, these more advanced stuff, that ability to be able to just stop and watch the thoughts come and go to a point to where you can even stop and watch the gaps before at the end of that last thought, before the next one. Sometimes you can spot that gap and you can just rest there. It might even be a second or two, but then if you get to know how to do that and watch it, it becomes longer. And I hit half an hour eventually. At one point, it's like, oh my god, this thing stops. It was a really mind changing for me. I realized this. I had more choice with this thing now. Before I had no choice. So that's clear mind. I won't go into the open heart ones as much, but essentially there's just two I'll reference, which is openness, which is the ability to be, just an open human being towards other people, and to life events, and not to be what I call an old fuddy-duddy. Like, for example, whenever technology, IT creates another upgrade, so I always try and say yes when I can, because I know the gap's just going to keep getting wider if I don't. So that ability to just stay open to people and perspectives, and staying dilated as a human. The next bit is the really foundational one in mindfulness, is acceptance. And this is the ability to accept and allow either good or bad feelings without resistance. Because I think when it's too hard, we just can't go there too much. Look, sometimes functionally, we shouldn't go there if it's going to knock us over, be too much. It's okay. But we should see that more as a coping, not a curing strategy. And in the end, we want to be able to get to a place to where we can be open to whatever's occurring in us and just allow that through and to feel it versus resist it. And then even be able to narrate it or speak to someone, hey, look, I'm just feeling this. Want to let you know it's not you're responsible for it. Like that's when we start to, combine it with mindfulness and also that external quality of life stuff. For example, the relationships category.
Yep.
In my program, but again, all from the research. There are I put 10 predictors in each of those quality of life categories that would be skill sets you need to have to get that right. And say in the relationship one, the primary one there is the ability to narrate or communicate difficult stuff without conflict. It's like, this is what's happening. The tendency can be, I think you're the cause of it. But right now, this is just my feeling. It's difficult. I just want to share this with you. I'd like to talk about it. But, so this is the mindfulness applying itself to the external world, because if it doesn't practically land in the external world, it's a good internal practice, but it's got to change your life increasingly for the better, right? So that's the second one. And probably we'll just add one to finally add it, which I love. It's called equanimity. It comes, the Dalai Lama has a really interesting way of putting it. He says that, which is of course biologically driven. He says, human beings really just want two things. They want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. That's all that's it, And so then this equanimity thing is where you just come from that place when you're dealing with someone going, you know what, you're just like me. You want to be happy and you don't want to suffer. And then the other half to that is, just as I want to be happy, may you be happy in this transaction, whatever it might be. Just as I don't want to suffer, may you not suffer in this encounter that we're having right now. And there's, there's training about how to just keep having that, in business is win-win. Like, if you sense there's a win-lose in the business deal thing and you're on the wrong end of that, it's like, I don't like this. So it's actually very good from every point of view, relationships, business. So I'll stop there, but there's 10 mindfulness tips that are really good to help people, but they're the main ones. That's being present, being objective, being able to rest with the moment, being able to allow things through, and being able to know that the human in front of you is just like you wanting good stuff too. Good stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a whole fully comprehensive 30-day program. When can people expect the release of this book?
Yes, next couple of months it's on its final drafts with the publishers. So basically, watch this space on the website, and once it's there, it's going to go hopefully circulate around wherever, whoever wants it, hopefully around the world, get that out.
Absolutely. I'll definitely make sure that all those links, to the pre-release on the show notes so that people can actually start purchasing or start booking, copies for their teams and things of that nature. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, Patrick, we've been on a journey, and I really appreciate your insights and everything else that you've been sharing with us here. But when we started, you mentioned that this whole journey started because you had a question and you didn't know why somebody on their yacht was still worried about taking their, Prozac or anxiety pills when a Tibetan monk is just sitting there calmly and enjoying everything else, that is happening with the mindfulness that they're enjoying there. Did you ever get
In
to
the freezing snow?
in the freezing snow? Yes. Did you ever get a conclusion to this? Did you ever, in your research, in your findings and everything else,
Yes.
what was the ultimate conclusion to that question that got you on this quest?
Greed is good. I'm going to be very paradoxical what that means. In other words, have it all. The
Right.
right version of greed, as in it's our human potential to be inwardly happy and to have a great life. It's like it's not an either or, it's both. And I think that's why we struggle. It's like, oh, but I kind of want that and I want that. Well, you should. This is the kind of the right kind of wish, you could say. Obviously, Wall Street greed is good is horrific. It's all based upon win-lose. But
Yeah.
this is the complete opposite. It's like I thirst. Perhaps even better word is thirst is good. I I know I want this, and this is possible, but it does require that. Well, two things, I guess, as they say. As Anthony Robbins talks about, heading east towards a sunset doesn't matter how motivated you are. It's the wrong direction, man. You need to have good method. You need to have good method as well as good motivation. And I would say that to me, and I also have written some articles on mindfulness-based enlightenment or enlightened heroes, and and can mindfulness create superheroes? And I've done a lot of work on what this question is that you've asked, which is the perfect human, and what is it? And it really is where they have that inner well-being, and they feel that sense of inner silence or stillness. But it's also connected to everything else, which they might want to call oneness or non-dualism and so on, enlightenment, union with God, being, presence. Like all the mainstream words like inner well-being, it just makes kind of normal. And they say that when you have this, you're finally what they call an ordinary human being at last. You actually, it's working properly internally. And that click kind of bit is that if it's working properly internally, it means that your cognitive processes externally in the world work properly too. So you do have a kind of a compassionate but still truth-based, relationship communication style. You do know that it's kind of from a profit and loss, that's waste there, because it's not necessary. So it's you have a kind of a functional approach to life. So yeah, but we're going to make that thirst is good. I think that's the right, and that it's possible to have inner and outer, and that's what I would call just a functional human being that's loving and kind and clear, and then can be just at rest as required.
Absolutely. Thirst is good, greed is good, but I think I like the greed part because I mean the those words in and of themselves, even though they have different connotations and meanings in other spaces, but I viscerally believe we're here to live, to learn, and to contribute. So if you learn how to live the best life possible, that means your inner world, creates your outer world. And that in and of itself means the people around you, everything around you creates an environment that, you know, sustains the kind of person you're becoming. And, you know, you need to learn to be that. You need to learn to have that inner well-being and also that outer well-being. And once you've got all of those together, you do like what Dr. Patrick has just done here. You send the elevator down and you contribute to others so they too can actually experience that. So I really like you know, what we ventured into today, and I really appreciate the time that you took, you know, obviously expanding our brains. I could actually hear the neural pathways forming as you were speaking, you know, like really you know, learning a lot from that. So thank you so much there, Dr. Patrick.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I like what you just said right at the end, taking the elevator down in terms of contributing, because to me, that's one of the fruits that I look for if people are growing in this work, is that natural, spontaneous interest in others starting to grow, you know, in wanting to contribute. You know, like service to me is a fruit of maturity. So yeah, nice.
Absolutely. And what you just did today, Dr. Patrick, is not only send the elevator down, but you've planted an apple seed. But we just don't know how many apples are in that. So thank you so much for that, you know, presence of yours. Now,
My
for,
pleasure.
for those that are watching right now, if you're still hungry for more wisdom and inspiration, I'm going to be putting all the links to Dr. Patrick's website and also his upcoming release book, you know, which is going to be in the next couple of months. But be sure to maybe rewatch this episode again, because there's so much that was packed in a short space of time in here. And this time around, you want to be doing it, you know, taking notes. And also be sure to subscribe for future episodes that are going to be packed with valuable insights and engaging conversations. Now, until next time, stay mindful and stay prosperous. Bye for now.